Welcome to Chicago, welcome to IETF 98, and welcome to HomeNet. We shall begin. Note well that which is on the screen. Has everyone noted it well? Thank you very much.
Can you guys actually see these screens from where you are? We're aware that the one on this side is rather small. If you can't see it, please just sit close.
We can see the screens, but we can't hear you very well.
Okay. We'll try and talk a little bit closer to it. How's that, Paul? Okay. It seems a little bit directional. Yes, if you can't see the screens, just please sit closer. We're constrained by how close the projectors are to the front of the auditorium. Okay, let's do a little bit of administrivia. We need to get these blue sheets going around, please. Could we please have a volunteer for a note taker and for a Jabber relay? Somebody, please. Thank you, Lee. And a note taker, please. Yes, that'd be fine. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so Barbara's volunteering to share note-taking responsibilities on the Etherpad. So if anybody else could help, please. Come on, yeah.
Would you like to assist Barbara in note-taking?
Yes, I can do that.
You might not, do you know how to do it on the Etherpad? Or you can do it on the Etherpad.
Right. Okay, thank you, Stuart. Okay, just quick agenda bash. We'll do a quick update on our drafts. As you may have noticed, we've actually got a very short amount of scheduled actual talks on the agenda. We originally only requested a 90-minute session. We got given a 2.5-hour session. The stuff we've actually got on the agenda isn't even going to take an hour and a half, not even that. But we'll touch on that in a moment. So we should be having Julius talk about the Babel profile, and Ted and Daniel Migo have produced a simpler version of the HomeNet naming architecture for our consideration, which I believe would be intended to replace the more complicated version. But we'll let Ted talk to that when he comes up. So the new drafts in the working group, so Ted's aforementioned simple HomeNet naming. The HomeNet.03 and HomeNet Redact 03 are currently in AED evaluation, but Terry will be coming up to talk a little bit about those after the other two presentations. But I'll just point out now he will be taking clarifying questions only. I'm sure Terry will re-emphasize that when he comes up. In light of the newer HomeNet naming architecture document, Ted's previous version has expired. And we still have a number of documents that are either waiting on work in other working groups or essentially have gone by the wayside as things have developed on the naming architecture. So, without further ado, could Julius please come up for his presentation? And please stand in the pink box. And I'm afraid our clicker isn't working, so I'll need to drive the slides from here.
Perhaps I could have it on the screen too. Perhaps I could have them on the screen too. That's more convenient for me.
I'm afraid this is just the main screen.
Okay. So, hello. Next, please. Is that better? Okay. So, I accepted to be editor of the Babel profile for HomeNet draft, which was meant to be a technical but rather consensual draft. So it has two parts. So I was wondering whether make it two drafts or one. Mark convinced me to do just one draft. There is a first part which tells you how you parameterize Babel if you want to use it in HomeNet. So it says things like, if you have a gigabit Ethernet link, give it a metric of 96. Doesn't say exactly that, but that's the rough idea. Or it tells you that you must implement IPv6 and you should implement IPv4. Okay, things that are needed to get reasonable interoperability between different HomeNet implementations, and they are just parameters that you plug into Babel. And that's no problem at all. And the second part gives the interactions between the HNCP protocol and the Babel protocol. So those are things that don't happen on the wire. They are purely local interactions between the two daemons. And they tell you things like, for example, if you are announcing an external prefix with IPv6, then you should ensure that Babel is announcing a source-specific default route and gives the details. Okay, those are things that are pretty obvious if you understand how the pieces fit, but they need to be written down somewhere. And so we had two implementations of HNCP, HNetD and SHNCPD, and that was pretty convenient because I could know when I was being too strict, if I was forbidding the behavior of one of the two implementations that don't behave exactly the same. Next, please. So the plan was, to have one of those clean drafts that become RFC after just 2 iterations. -00 was the first document that I had written on my own. I presented it in Berlin, said I have doubts about this, about that. The working group was extremely helpful. There was consensus. There was almost unanimity on all the points I raised except one, on which the minority opinion didn't feel really strongly about it. And so -01 was a complete document, absolutely perfect in all ways. Just send it to the IESG and be done with it. There is a Polish proverb that says that man makes plans and God laughs. Next, please. Requirement 5 in the draft, I didn't write it entirely, but says roughly that a HomeNet implementation of Babel must implement HMAC-based authentication with reference to the right RFC, and must enable it if signaled to do so by HNCP. Next. And I have no idea, I wrote it, but I have absolutely no idea what that means. So basically, this is not precise enough to ensure interoperability. And as far as I know, nobody has any plans to implement it. So I first raised the issue in private with Mark, then in private with both chairs and Marcus Stenberg. Then I sent a detailed mailing to the mailing list, which you'll find in the archives on 4th of January this year. And I did not receive any helpful advice on the mailing list. Next, please. So in order to implement requirement 5, you need to have a consensus mechanism that allows HNCP nodes to decide that we want to enable authentication on a given link. The consensus mechanism can be as simple as we always enable authentication. That is a consensus mechanism, but the consensus mechanism needs to be defined. Second, you don't want to be configuring all of your HomeNet routers with a authentication key. So what you need here is a second consensus mechanism which allows the HNCP nodes to agree on an authentication key that they pass to Babel. So we need to define the algorithms, we need to define the packet format, and we need to provide a reference implementation. Next, please. I'm really proud to have been working with HomeNet over the last 2 years. I think we are very serious in HomeNet about having working code. Everything that we've done in this working group has been implemented either once or twice, or I love this word, thrice. And I would not like to innovate by being the editor of the first document that nobody has any plans to implement. Next, please. So I'm stuck here. I have a few suggestions. So the simplest, but perhaps problematic, and the one I'm in favor of, would be, let's drop requirement 5 and say, well, authentication is the problem of the lower layers. Use WPA, use WPA2, put a guy with a Kalashnikov in front of every Ethernet plug. The second suggestion I have would be to find someone who is willing to do the work. That is, who is willing to describe the needed algorithms, who is willing to define the packet format, and who is willing to work on a reference implementation. I'm not volunteering to do that because I'm not competent to work on security stuff. Of course, I'd be quite willing to help. The third suggestion I have, I'm trying to be exhaustive here, is fire me, pick a new editor. And well, I'm open to other ideas. Please. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Julius. So, I'm slightly disappointed that we don't have a queue of people volunteering to help already, or do you prefer other suggestions? Sorry. There's a very sensitive mic, or rather, very narrow mic. Okay, so yeah, so slightly disappointed we don't have a queue of people preferring help or suggestions as to how we get out of this impasse. From the chair's perspective, my concern when asked about this requirement 5 is simply that I was not convinced that we would actually get through the ISG without a suitable mechanism in place in the document. Let's see, Terry, speculating on that potentially. Yeah. Is there any feeling for whether we should simply just take this out of the document? Please, yes.
David Skenazy, Apple. Regarding first your point about the IESG review, and for that matter, the broader IETF, every protocol doesn't necessarily need an authentication mechanism. It's that every document needs a security consideration and a security discussion. So there's a lot of work that went through this on the security requirements and what we could do to solve them. That could be useful and documented in the document, but it doesn't need to be a hard requirement on the protocol yet.
Indeed.
So my personal recommendation would be to option 1, to remove requirement 5, because one of the main goals, in my opinion, of HomeNet is that I can buy a bunch of routers from different vendors, I plug them in, and I'm done. If that involves, I plug them in, I go into the one from this that has this web UI to copy this key, and I go into the other one to type it in that, oh, crap, that's in the wrong language, it's never going to work. So until we figure out a whole story for this, we shouldn't put requirements on ourselves. This can always be added later.
Pierre Plisser. So there is some security in HNCP already. So in the RFC, there is the use of DTLS supposedly on links that are unsecured. So HNCP is supposed to have some way to decide whether a link is secure or not, so that we can rely on. I think it's part of IETF statements that we should design protocols that are secured. So just leaving it, just dropping this requirement would make HomeNet vulnerable to routing protocols attacks. That would be annoying, I think. That said, defining something in the text that decides how to pick a key for Babel shouldn't be that complicated. I feel a little bit like you. I would like to help, but I feel like I'm not competent to touch security stuff. But I'm sure it's a matter of a few lines of code. It's not so complicated. Please, we need Marcus. Marcus, can you hear us?
Marcus responded. I'm watching in the Java room. He says, running manually keyed IPsec SA would be obvious choice. All RFCs are out there already. Smirk.
Ted Lemon. So, I think that DTLS seems like it would solve this problem.
Once again, excuse me?
DTLS seems like it would solve this problem. We don't have a threat model or a security model. That's actually a really big gaping hole in what we're doing. And that's why you aren't getting any enthusiasm about this, because what's the point of implementing this if you don't know how you're going to use it? Sorry.
What's going on over there?
Maybe I'll just be Elvis. Right. So this thing's kind of heavy. So we don't have a security model. We don't have a threat model. We don't know what we could reasonably accomplish, and we don't know what we can't reasonably accomplish. And so it's no surprise that nobody's enthusiastic about implementing something that we don't even know how to deploy. And I think that's really the problem. So debating about this, I mean, basically the hand wave that I would do here is use DTLS, but we also actually need to stop waving our hands and solve this problem.
So you would advocate for, Julius has in his slides an assumption that we want to continue with the proud tradition of having a reference implementation for everything that we put into our internet drafts and our RFCs. I think I just heard, okay, well, maybe we could relax at this time. It's better to go ahead and at least have some text. I mean, that would there's a proud tradition in the IETF of the security consideration section sprinkling IPsec or whatever the favorite security mechanism of the day is, and saying, yep, I've got a security. And, maybe that's what we need to do because that's all we know how to do. Is that what you're saying?
So, sorry, I actually, when I got up to the mic, intended to say something a little more detailed than what I actually said. If we don't have a mechanism that we can actually implement that will work to authenticate Babel implementations to each other, then we can never have interoperability, because we'll have a million Babel implementations out there, some of which implement security and some of which don't, which is actually exactly the scenario that I'm sorry, I forgot your name. That he was talking about. So the right thing to do is actually put some security mechanism that we think will work if we can figure out how to key it, and then solve the keying problem later, because I don't think we know how to solve the keying problem right now. Does that make sense? In other words, assume that you have keys, that you've shared in some secure way, and having done that, you can now sign your communications.
I don't think that the authentication mechanism is what the issue is. I think that the main problem is the interaction between HNCP and Babel.
Right.
So as David pointed out, you really do want the keys. You really don't want to be configuring Babel. You want HNCP to take care of the configuration and everything to happen in HNCP. And you want HNCP to decide on everything, including the keys that Babel is using. And that means defining the HNCP mechanism and do that. And that is the bit that worries me.
Okay. So, Julius, may I clarify something there? Do I understand that Babel already has a specified HMAC-based authentication mechanism?
Yes.
So what you're saying is that the problem is scoped to simply how do we securely distribute the keys within the network so as to configure Babel itself. So we're not asking how to secure Babel, but just how to distribute the keys.
Yes,
Okay.
and if I can paraphrase Pierre's point.
Sorry, to the mic, please.
So Pierre's point, if I understand it right, is that this is all doable. We sort of know how to do it, but somebody needs to step up to do it.
Yeah, just Pierre Plissard speaking, just to contradict Ted, it's actually very simple with HNCP to get a pre-shared key that we can just give out to Babel. Assuming HNCP is running in a secure mode, so using DTLS on links that are unsecured, it's just a TLV. And a simple consensus among the routers, we do that all the time. So just a TLV containing some key, and we can auto-generate a key for Babel.
David Skenazy. Well, if we assume that we have keys, then we're kind of like, that was easy. And I'm not sure that's the right assumption to make, because if we design all these protocols with an assumption and then there's no running code whatsoever, and then we realize, oh, that we never managed to get that assumption to work, then we just have all these paragraphs that don't help. As people have pointed out, there are many mechanisms, DTLS, IPsec, pick your choice, that all need to be bootstrapped, and rushing into saying, oh, let's use DTLS and then HMAC for Babel versus let's run all this over IPsec is a premature decision until we figure that out.
So just to throw additional gasoline on the fire, this is Ted Lemon again. I think that actually what Pierre just described is not the right way to solve the problem. Because what you really, if you're doing pre-shared keys that are symmetric, then what you want is to have a key pair. You want to have a key that's shared between each pair of communicating devices, not a key that everybody agrees on. If you have a key that everybody agrees on, you have no security at all, because you can't tell who you're talking to.
I think HNCP works this way. So in HNCP, it's based on trust. I mean, it's a bit more advanced security model in HNCP. The idea being that every time you would need to modify that key that Babel uses, you just update the key. So if you need to revoke someone, revoke some router, it's HNCP does that and just changes the key that is used by Babel. The key that is used by Babel is generated by HNCP and can be modified anytime. HNCP has a stronger, yeah.
So the specific point that I'm making is that a key used by Babel is not the right solution. There should be a key shared between each pair of devices that are communicating.
So there's a question for Julius then. Does the Babel security profile allow pairwise key sharing, or is it network-wide?
It allows multiple keys. So it's shared key, but it does allow multiple keys. So I don't know.
Certainly there are deployments where there are group keys versus pairwise for everyone. I mean, this gets into the whole debate of ease of key distribution versus your threat model and the security, right? So I mean, I know the number of solutions that have some sort of group keying involved. I think this argument between Ted and Pierre is degenerating into
I have
pairwise
data
versus
on
group.
actual authentication of routing protocols. Is Grant Atkinson. And I'm actually the original author of the OSPF authentication and the RIP authentication, both of which are deployed. And with OSPF, all of the routers on a given link have to use the same key. There is no distinguishing that router A originated the message as opposed to router C if routers A, B, and C share the same link. So there is OSPF is an existence example that you don't necessarily need unique keying. For RIP, a common key is used for all routers. In both OSPF and RIP, there is no automated key management that's built into either RIP or OSPF. The IETF had a CARP, K-A-R-P working group some years ago, which basically went nowhere to try to do automated keying for routing protocols. And
like
what people really do in practice is they use provisioning systems. And specific example is that an ISP that is running something like netconf, it might or might not actually be netconf, and they probably are not using Yang today, but they have SSH or TLS as a way to protect the provisioning session between a centralized database that knows the configuration of all the devices, and the key is just one element of that, and they send that over a secure authenticated channel. That may or may not be the best way to do it, but that is a common way that it is done. I don't know of anybody doing automated key management for RIP, because people who are using RIP have small networks and it's practical to just run around and type in the keys.
Oh, we have a protocol for that.
But at least for OSPF, people can and do, large ISPs can and do provision the keys using the same mechanism they use to configure the routers remotely.
Yeah. So the question to the group then is, do we have people here in the room or on the list or on Java who would help with number 2? It sounds like we've certainly got some expertise in the room as far as routing protocol security is concerned, although as per previous discussion, it's really actually the distribution of keys that's the problem with HNCP rather than the routing protocol per se. Have we got people here who can stand up and be counted?
I object to that proposal. This is not the same situation as a network that's operated by, like, you know, I mean, we used to use RIP back at DEC when I first started doing networking stuff, right? It was actually RIP v1, I think, which was kind of explosive, but let's not get into that. And, you know, we could have operated a network where we had to go type the keys in or where we shared the keys with HNCP, but this is not the same situation. Anything that connects to the network in principle can join the HNCP conversation. And that means that if you want debuggability, you have to know who you're talking to. You have to know who sent the message. And to know who sent the message, it has to be signed with a key that belongs to that particular entity, not a key that is shared amongst all entities that are communicating. That's the issue. And so now my point here is not that you should accept that what I just said is true. I may be completely full of shit here, but we need to actually do the threat analysis and figure out if what I said is true rather than jumping to a solution. But I don't think that we can legitimately go forward without doing that work, and that's work that we've kind of been punting on for these many years. I am definitely interested in doing that work. I don't want to have to do it by myself because then you'll get Ted's opinion, which is probably wrong. But we need to do that work, and if we don't do that work before we publish this, then we're going to wind up with no secure interoperability.
So can I make a proposal? We've got the wonderful opportunity that this is 9 a.m. on Monday. We have some people that seem to at least, you know, have expertise and maybe even motivation. If by the end of the week you guys get together and say, yes, we are the group. Okay, I can ask for call of hands, right? For volunteers to raise hands. If you guys get together with a coherent way forward by the end of the week this week, that's the design team, and well, of course, whomever else would want to join in on list. If you can get Marcus here as well, that would be great. It's a little unconventional, but I'm just using the fact that it's 9 a.m. on Monday, and we've got 3 or 4
We also
have
a fair amount of time probably at the end of the session if we don't keep talking about this.
Okay. Can we get a raise of hands of people that would like to join in on this security discussion with Ted, with the ultimate goal of people fulfilling number 2 here with Julius?
Awesome.
Do you see those names? Do you see those people? Look around. There's at least 5 people in the room. So you guys get together with Ted and Julius afterwards and try to solve this by the end of the week. Make sense? Well, Lee, jump in.
I'm late at the mic, but I was in line as Jabber Scribe.
Yeah, sorry.
Lee Howard relaying for Marcus Stenberg. He wanted to point out that there's a potential scalability issue that technically we can support. Where did it go? Technically, we can support multiple keys, but not for n-squared keys for n devices. So there's a potential scalability, but I think he's also going to be paying attention on this and stuff.
Okay, thank you, Julius. Ted, you're up.
Oh, goody, we don't have a monitor screen. All right. So I'm Ted Lemon, and Danny Migo bugged me a little while ago to get to work on this simple HomeNet naming and service discovery architecture because the working group didn't seem all that excited about the previous complicated HomeNet naming and service discovery architecture. Maybe I should have chosen a better title. So next slide. So we got together, and Daniel produced a kind of a intention document, and I took what he did and kind of at the very last minute before IETF took the old document, sucked the bits out of it that I think are relevant to what we actually possibly might have consensus to do, and produced a new draft that was published before the deadline. Has anybody seen that document? Oh boy. All right. All right. Well, so I'll just tell you about it. So it's a first draft. As I said, I sucked the bits out of the old HomeNet naming architecture document. So there are still a few little crumbs left over from that document that need to be cleaned up, but it's pretty solid in terms of the general structure, I think. All of the stateful stuff and all of the security is gone. There's no external visibility of names, so you can't publish HomeNet zone anymore at all. The hope and the intention in the way that the document is written is that you could pile a second document on top of that that adds that functionality back, and I certainly intend to write that document. Whether it will get working group consensus or not, I don't know. Let's see. And, you know, unsurprisingly, it relies on DNS-SSD discovery proxy, which is the new name for the DNS-SSD hybrid proxy. Next slide. So there are a few differences. Whoa, what happened to that? Oh, I see. Yeah, that was a late night slide issue. So there's a few differences from what's specified in the simple architecture versus what's in the discovery proxy document. The discovery proxy presents the discovery proxy as a single functional block. I split it into two functional blocks. So the two functional blocks are the querying proxy and the relaying proxy. And the other thing is that the discovery proxy relies on the manager of the network providing meaningful names for the links. And obviously that's not going to happen on a HomeNet. So we just have to come up with names and they don't mean anything. And there are some issues with that. Next slide. So the querying proxy answers DNS protocol requests from hosts and only from hosts. Whenever it gets a request, it generates proxies, which it sends to all of the relaying proxies that it knows about. And then it just sits there and waits for answers to come in and combines the responses. It does the name rewriting that's specified in the discovery proxy document. Let's see. It only does DNS protocol. It doesn't do MDNS. It does query aggregation as specified in the discovery proxy document for hosts that don't support DNS push. If hosts do support DNS push, it does the DNS push support. And there can be one or more querying proxies per HomeNet, and every HomeNet router has to support the querying proxy function, just because, you know, otherwise you might buy two HomeNet routers, neither of which supports it, and not be able to do service discovery. Next slide. So the relaying proxy gets DNS protocol queries from querying proxies. It sends MDNS protocol requests to the link that each individual querying or relaying proxy sends the MDNS protocol requests to the link that it is serving. And when it gets responses back, it just relays them back to the querying proxies. There's no state being held in the relaying proxy, probably, although there could be some debate about that. Because if you're putting it on top of an existing MDNS implementation, that might actually already do some caching. Let's see. It doesn't do any name rewriting. It assumes essentially the DNS push support model, although I'm not convinced that we actually need to do DNS push as opposed to just sending multiple responses, since we're talking to an entity that we already know supports it. But it might be better to do it just because that way, you know, if you look at the protocol, you won't be confused. And we don't have to actually then specify the relaying proxy to querying proxy protocol. There's one relaying proxy per link. If there's two HomeNet routers connected to a link, HNCP chooses one of those routers to serve as the relaying proxy for that link. And all HomeNet routers obviously have to support relay proxy. Next slide. Name conflicts. This is not particularly different than what's in the the discovery proxy document. MDNS does name defense on the link, so we don't have to worry about name conflicts on the link. That's taken care of by MDNS. Conflicts across the link are dealt with in the same way that they're dealt with in the discovery proxy. And link names, zone names, are bogus and don't mean anything and will look weird to users. So if there are conflicts, then one way to deal with that is that we can, in the case of conflicts only, reveal the link subdomain to the user. That's one option. Another option is that we can just always present the link subdomain, so the user just always sees that little ugly number. I don't love that solution. And then, you know, there's an unanswered question, and it's unanswered probably because I'm just ignorant, as to how big of a problem this is. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the sets of cases that I think can cause naming conflicts. I had a naming conflict on my laptop. It's called MacBook Pro, and as soon as I connected to the IETF network, for some reason there was another device on the network called MacBook Pro. I don't know why. So this can just happen by accident. It can happen because somebody's trying to attack a device. Like if you've got a printer, somebody might try to pose as the printer and capture all of your documents and then kind of man in the middle you. So that's a possible reason why there could be a name conflict. I've never actually seen that happen, but obviously it's not a bad idea to defend against it, although we don't actually have a defense against it. Another thing which I've seen in networks that do the discovery proxy wrong is that if you have a device that's present on one link and then it appears on another link, the discovery proxy may defend the name on the second link, causing the device to renumber its name. They usually just increment a number. And then that kind of produces an ugly result. Another thing that can happen is you've got a device that's got two network interfaces, and if they present the same name on different links, then you have a conflict. So one of the problems, the reason why we can't actually solve this is that MDNS doesn't have a unique identifier per device, as far as I know. So we can't just look at the identifier and say, oh, these are the same device, we don't need to do disambiguation, which would be awfully nice. We can't use the link local address because it might be different. You know, even if it's serial, you might connect with the Wi-Fi at one point and then with your Ethernet at another point, you've got a different MAC address, it doesn't work. I don't love the solutions that we have. I'd like to come up with a better solution, but there is no solution that's perfect. Either we have to add new protocol, which is somewhat impractical, or we have to do some kind of heuristic to deal with the name conflict issue. And whatever that heuristic is, I have a feeling is going to have some edge cases that are going to be difficult. So this is something that we should decide on. I'm not going to, you know, I could go either way. I mean, I'm a geek, so I don't care about the little weird numbers that much. But I have a feeling that it may cause a little bit of pain for end users. But I don't know. So that's we need to figure that out. Next slide. Yeah. So there are some regrets about going to the simple architecture. I'm not entirely happy with it, although I think it's probably, you know, a good choice from the standpoint of being able to support less capable routers. We don't have a security model. The old architecture was heading in the direction of a security model. It didn't really have a security model either, but it was getting there. We don't have a registration protocol, which means that we're just using MDNS, and MDNS has issues. There are things about MDNS that don't work. It would be awfully nice to have a registration protocol. And if we don't do the registration protocol in this document, I don't think that we realistically are going to have a registration protocol. So that's a regret. There is no clean way to enumerate all services. That's just not how MDNS works. If you're clever, you can sit and sniff on the wire and watch services announce when they come on the wire, but that really depends on all of the stars being right. And we know what happens when all the stars are right, so that's probably not a good idea anyway. And of course, we don't have state, so there's no place to connect that list, even if we had one. And you know, we're not fixing MDNS. I guess that really goes back to the registration protocol thing. So next slide. So basically, this is the last slide. Breathe a sigh of relief. So we need to decide whether we want to do this or what I was proposing before. If you're not familiar with this or what I was proposing before, you probably have a strong opinion about this. you know, we need to figure out whether we care about the registration protocol issue. It's not really our problem, so arguably, even if we did care about it, we couldn't solve the problem here anyway. I actually have a document that I did in DNSSD that talks about the registration protocol issue. The ore that we could put in the water is whether we specify it in our architecture. If we specify it in our architecture, then we need to probably get DNSSD to actually solve the problem. And I'm sure they'd love that. You know, there's the disambiguation problem. We need to figure that out. And we need to figure out how important ugly versus clean presentation is to us. So those are the decisions before the working group. If nobody here except 3 have read the draft, I don't know that we can make those decisions in the room today, but these are things that we should be thinking about. The draft, by the way, is only 8 pages, so it wouldn't be that painful to read it soon.
Hi, Ted.
Hi.
For the note takers, my name is Stuart Cheshire. I think the suggestion that the DNSSD working group take some of this on is not a bad one. I have recently been getting more involved. There's an industry organization called the Thread Group, which I think was originally spearheaded by Nest, but now has many companies in it. And they're doing good work using mesh networks, using 6LoWPAN. And that's a mesh network, so classic multicast is painful on that network, and they need a service discovery solution. So I think there's definitely an industry need for this, and I'm still learning about Thread, but I see that as a consumer of this. One other little point, which I almost hesitate to mention because it may be abused, but you said there's no way to enumerate services. There is a little known feature, and if you look in RFC 6763, search for underscore services, and a query for underscore services dot underscore DNSSD enumerates all the service types. Now, there may be devices that don't support that correctly, and that's an issue in all protocols. If it's not implemented correctly, it's not going to work. But at least in principle, there is a way to do this exhaustive bootstrap where you get the list of services, and then for each service type, you get the list of instances. And this can produce a ton of traffic on the network, but you can pull that thread and in principle find everything.
Cool. Thanks.
Hi, Ted.
Hi,
Terry
Kerry.
Lynn, Verizon. Just as you rightly pointed out in the previous session, that one should not go off and design security solutions without a threat model. I feel that it would be useful to have some sort of a user model articulated, before we, really hone in on specific solutions for this work. So, for example, it seems to me that you're pointing at a residential user. What sorts of things could we assume about that user? Does the user know a priori what service they're searching for? What's the maximum length of a flat list of instances for that service that we might want to present before the whole thing kind of breaks down. So you probably have such a model in your head.
Yep.
I think it'd be very useful if you prefaced the technical part of this with some sort of a.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Hi, this is Andrew Sullivan. And I think I want to expand on that a little bit. So I have to apologize because I was following the other architecture document, which didn't seem to be getting updated, and I wondered why, and now I know.
Sorry.
So I read this very quickly just now, so I'm probably missing something. But I have to say that I think what Kerry just said is right. That I'm starting to feel like the target is not very clear here, and we have a whole bunch of stuff. Including a long and boring discussion that we've had about names, that all happened because we wanted, the big set of cool stuff that was in the other architecture document that made for things to be complicated. And now we've whittled that down in this document, it looks to me, so that most of those controversial decisions that we were making didn't need to happen anyway, and we could just get around all of them.
Right.
So I now feel like we need to step up one level and sort of make a little bit clearer exactly which target we're trying to hit, right? We had some use cases early on, and it feels to me, just looking at it, and again, I did this very quickly, like while you were talking, so I'm sorry if I'm missing something, but it feels to me like what we're actually doing is throwing away some of the use cases that we had before in order to make this simpler. That's okay. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but I think we ought to do it consciously rather than to try to simplify.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I feel the same frustration. Like whether the kitchen sink approach that I chose last time was the right approach or not. This is definitely the most pared down approach that I'm even willing to contemplate, and it's pretty pared down. And I'm not in love with it, but it does have the virtue of being pretty easy to come to consensus on, and we already basically know how to do it. So I'd rather do something more ambitious, but the fact of the matter is here we are how many years since the working group was chartered, and we don't have an architecture for naming yet. So maybe that's an indication that we need to set our sights a little lower. Ralph.
Hi, Ralph Drums. In the interest of giving you something to do that's more ambitious, I wonder if there are other local naming mechanisms, local naming protocols that you might want to at least leave hooks for or consider for future inclusion, trying to adopt the design principle of don't cut yourself off from other things that you might want to include in the future. Have you already considered that? And
honestly, no, I haven't. So if you have some suggestions in that direction,
nice
that would
return
be
of service. Nice return of service.
Oh yeah, I've been here a while. So yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, and I don't mean to say, and therefore you go deal with it. I'll also look at it, but I think you may know more than I do. So.
Oh no, I make no such claims. Thank you.
Okay, so the sense I'm getting is that we're too early to be looking at adopting this, and as yet we haven't adopted the earlier advanced HomeNet naming architecture document either. That unfortunately means that we're not going to be in a position to do anything until I think we've seen at least one more rev of this doc that takes into account the feedback we're getting today. So I guess all we can do is ask Ted to push something out fairly soon. And please, if you have further feedback for Ted, again, it's 9 o'clock Monday. Yeah, we have all week to get further feedback into this. Let's have some discussion on the list as well, please. And if we can get something out way before Prague, so that by Prague we can actually make a consensus call to actually adopt. Okay. Do you have any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Actually, on a related note, I see Daniel over there in the room. So we do have two much older documents relating to naming that Daniel is also a co-author of. So there's the front-end naming delegation and DHC options related to that. Those, to my mind, now look like they're pretty dead. Do you concur with that, Daniel? Or do you think there's still scope for those to be brought into a more advanced naming scheme further on? It's unclear where those sit now.
Well, they address something different than the one we addressed.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're dead, in the sense that we're just waiting for. They were more looking at how you can outsource your naming, your alternative naming server from your CPU to an outsourcing architecture. So I don't think they're dead.
Okay.
We're just waiting for the naming architecture
for the rest of the architecture to catch up with them. Okay, we'll let them sit where they are then for now. Okay, thank you, Daniel.
But we might have to change them once we
Indeed.
have the architecture. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Terry.
Hey folks, responsible AD hat on. So when the HomeNet document came across my desk for AD eval, I sent a request off to DNSOP for them to evaluate this in two aspects. One is the 6761 constructs. The other is to consider the secure delegation in terms of DNSSEC, or sorry, the insecure delegation in terms of DNSSEC. The request is fair and appropriate, and it's what we do in the IETF, because we like cross-area, cross-working group review, especially given the place where we're looking at here. So what I'm going to describe at this point in time, and I'm only at the end of this going to ask the clarifying questions, is that this is my current assessment of where we sit at the moment. There are other people who are engaged in discussions. In fact, we've had a number of discussions with a number of people to try and work out what the situation is and where we might go from here. So this is my summary situation at the moment. .homenet could be added to the special use domain registry based on 6761. Second one, the expected future operation of HomeNet resolution for DNS validating stub resolvers requires a break in the DNSSEC chain of trust. I mean, some of this you all already know. You've heard it before. So to achieve that second one, the document, being the draft, additionally asks IANA to insert an insecure delegation into the root zone. The ask for that is not covered in IETF policy terms, and it actually tries to put an entry into someone else's registry. Now, doing that will probably require a set of very collaborative discussions with the ICANN community. A new process would probably have to be constructed, and I'd say it would have to be. And there are no expectations that that process will happen in any reasonable time frame. So there are some options, and these are the options that I see them, and to give you an idea of where some people surrounding this are talking about. Obviously, there's the status quo, which is seek a .homenet special use domain with the request for an insecure delegation to the root zone. So that's our status quo as it stands right now. Second option would be to seek a .homenet special use domain without the delegation request and ask the IETF, IESG, IAB to commence the discussion with the ICANN community to achieve an insecure delegation. There's another one, which is to seek a home.arpa insecure delegation as per RFC 3172. Or the last one, go for a .homenet special use domain with asking the ISG, IAB, IETF to go off and talk to the ICANN community. But if that doesn't work, fall back to doing something in ARPA. So these are some of the areas that we're thinking about, and I thought it's worthwhile to highlight that to the working group, to say this is not an easy conversation to have. There are lots of aspects to this. With that, I'm open to clarifying questions.
Wes Hardiker, USCISI. What would the insecure delegation, excuse me for not being able to speak, look like? So, you know, I mean, part of the question that before making that decision is I'd want to know, would there be a name server record, and what would it point to?
There would be a name server record. It would be an unsigned name server record, and we'd be pointing to the AS112, I think it was going to be.
There was some debate about exactly what to do, but yeah, that would be one option.
That would be one option.
It would point to something that would return a, I don't know what you're talking about answer.
Ted.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, from my perspective, you know, Ray and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm wondering, like, does it seem like a bad idea to you guys to just because we have a number of other related problems like this. I mean, .onion doesn't need a delegation. We actually wanted a secure denial of existence for .onion, but for example, localhost currently has a secure denial of existence, which is bad. So there are other cases where we have stuff that really ought to be in the root zone and isn't. And what do we do about that? I mean, should we just have a document in DNS op that solves all of these at once?
I think the clarifying question you're trying to ask here is there something else we can do given that there are other use cases?
Well, it's what I just described sounds an awful lot like your option too, and that sounds like a reasonable option to me. I mean, does it sound,
It's a fluid state right now, so I really have no strong answer for you. Sorry.
Okay. No worries.
Just to, if I understand, Ted, are you trying to raise the point that, okay, we're trying to do something, but there's other general stuff, so it's not just us. There's other.
Well,
things
no,
that
I
need
mean,
to be
I
fixed
don't
here
really
as
want to
well.
go down that rat hole. Basically, what I'm asking is, like, is the right process to just do what we are talking about doing with the special use domain names registry, and then have a separate process in DNSOP that just deals with all of the cleanup for the cases where we really need a delegation in the root zone and don't have one of which would be HomeNet.
So the clarifying point is are you asking the group to be, one work item amongst a general thing that's going on in DNSOP anyway, or remove ourselves from that general thing? And I think that's the important, higher level question in a administrative sense to Terry. Is that, am I making sense?
I think Terry just said that he doesn't have the answer to that question for us. So
Okay.
So I'm okay with that. I mean, this is a hard problem.
Paul Hoffman. So a couple of things. Please don't do the status quo please don't do the status quo going into IETF last call, because the discussion in IETF last call will be useless. It'll be useless to you. It'll be useless to the IESG. It will be on many topics that turn out not to be important. So please don't do that. And I pick another one. If you feel like doing status quo, please rewrite the IANA consideration section. That is, I pointed out some issues after working group last call here. The authors worked on them, and that scares me. That is, it didn't come back to the working group. It just was like the authors said, oh yeah, you're right, and just did that. That to me seems like not a good way to have this working group understand what is being asked of the IETF and IETF last call. We've seen some IETF last calls recently that are hundreds of messages long, very hard to follow the threads. I was one of those I'm the shepherd on, and I assure you, trying to be a shepherd on one of those to make sure that people's responses are dealt with is impossible, because threads turn into threads and stuff. So please be clear and crisp. And then my last request is, if you're going to do what Ted just suggested of let's open this up, please don't assume it's DNSOP. DNSOP has just had a couple of failures on coming to consensus on things like this. I mean, you can put in DNSOP if you want it to be a failure, which is, I mean, I can't guarantee a failure, but we do actually have a thread of...
Sorry, was your clarifying question then, do you want failure?
No, my clarifying question is if you want this to happen, please consider not just using the current tools, but to create a new tool called a new working group.
Yada yada. So I wanted to make it clear, the working group, that you guys really are in charge. You have a project ahead of you, and you have some potential requirements to put into the whatever you're doing. But you need to be really, really clear about what the implications of some of those requirements are. So if you decide to go a particular path, and that means a very lengthy process somewhere else outside the IETF and uncertain results, if that's okay, then by all means. But don't just pick a particular direction without understanding the implications. So I think there are some reasonable choices ahead of us, but you do need to make a sensible choice here. Thank you.
Suzanne Wolf as DNSOP co-chair. Well, I would dispute a few of Paul Hoffman's words as far as how DNSOP has stood on some of these questions. I think it is important to note that one of the things that's come out of the inquiry in DNSOP is that many of the issues arising are out of scope and out of competence for DNSOP. These are not strictly DNS issues, they just express themselves in that way. So the clarifying question for the working group, given the process and operational discussions that seem to arise from this. Do you want to wait literally indefinitely for a resolution?
I have a question for this because last IETF, I mean, it sounds like we're repeating this same set of options, and the working group, knew that it was walking into something that might be difficult in order to get the thing that it really wanted, and it was given the option, we could take this other thing, the .ARPA version, not really what we want, and it could be more expedient. That was the heart of the discussion last time, and I just went back and reread the notes. It was, we decided to go the longer, harder route in order to get the thing that we felt like was, really the best option for our, community. What has happened? What's different from last IETF to this IETF? Just what's the difference?
The IETF, the IESG, and the IIB have had more painful conversations since then.
That's what the working group, as you already said, we're in charge. That's what the working group asked the ISTAR to do on our behalf based on our consensus. So it's happened.
This is Andrew Sullivan. So I got up to, and I'm speaking with no hat, just even though my hat is like fading away, I just want to be clear that I'm speaking with no hat. I want to quibble actually with both Yari and the statement that you just made. The working group is not in charge. This is an IETF document. It's going to go to IETF consensus. So I agree with you that this working group's consensus has not changed, and I don't actually understand why we need to re-explore this rat hole at the mic line here. But I don't want people to believe, even for a second, that working group consensus gets to determine what IETF consensus is, because that's not how this organization works. So I mean, it might be that the area director is asking, are you really sure you want to go to IETF last call with this? Because you might find yourself in a bun fight where you haven't enough buns. I don't care about that, but I completely agree with you that this working group has already made its decision about that.
Thank you for that clarification. Don't want to suggest for a second that the IETF is not ultimately in charge here. I misspoke a little bit. The consensus of the working group was clear, and I think now we're saying the same thing.
Can I jump in?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Terry, this is hopefully just a clarifying question. Is it, in an email to a small group a few days ago, you said that you believe that if we leave the request for the insecure delegation in, that we will not be able to publish the RFC until that is resolved. Is there an opportunity to perhaps to publish where we are not blocking on that decision?
It's possible. I won't say 100%, but it's possible. Remove the insecure delegation. You're not then trying to push something into another entity's registry, and you're really just talking about a special use domain. And to date, I've not seen anything substantive in terms of the 6761 review to say that that can't happen.
That wasn't quite what I was aiming for. It was, could we at least leave mention of the desire for an insecure delegation in there? Because I think
not in an IANA considerations, no. So if you took that out of the IANA considerations and put it somewhere else to say at some point in time it might be really lovely to have my pony, yes, I think that might be a way forward. But again, we're in a fluid state right now.
Indeed. I mean, one of the considerations for us is that the insecure delegation is only required in the what's currently exceedingly rare case of a validation stub resolver. These things are more like unicorns just now than ponies. So, yeah, I think it's very important that we do get a domain reserved as soon as possible, whether that be .homenet or .home.arpa. I think it would be very unfortunate if if this whole process was delayed because of that need for an insecure delegation. But I do also feel it's important as a working group that we somehow at least flag the desirability of this, not least because we're not the only people who need this issue with the MOU resolved.
Ralph Drums. Actually, have two responses. The first, Mark, you asked what's changed, and just to be the clarification to that about what's changed is, as Andrew pointed out, the working group consensus has not changed, but there has been more official external review than there was as of the last working group meeting. So we've had a DNSOP working group review, and we've had I think it's an in-area directorate review that have provided more information that the working group may want to consider when it comes to consensus about what to do. So that has changed. The second thing is in response to, Ray, your suggestion, that actually has been discussed. I think it was discussed in public on the DNSOP working group review, although I'm not sure because I'm working from memory. I don't have the list in front of me. There is a concern about separating the two requests, one for the special use domain name registry and the root zone entry, in that if those two are separated and a bunch of code starts getting deployed with just HomeNet, and then we find out after we develop the process that we can't actually get the root zone entry for HomeNet, then we're stuck. We can't go back really and take back all of those deployed devices to get to home.arpa. So it's not a reason not to do it. It's just reporting a concern that came up in those discussions.
Yeah. Response to that, Ralph. I mean, notwithstanding that we're chartered not to require host changes, a validating stub resolver could actually just take a trust anchor for the local domain, at which point everything would start working again. It's
sure.
a
out of scope for this discussion, I think.
Yeah.
Just wanted to report that had been discussed in that way.
Ted Lemon. So I don't know if you're going to believe this is a clarifying question or not, but and if it's not, that's fine. But is it generally understood that regardless of what the outcome of this discussion is, we need to have the discussion with ICANN about precisely what the MOU says, or do people really just not want to open that can of worms? I mean, is that what's going on?
I can't speak to that. That's, I don't own the MOU, I'm sorry. I believe there are, nope, Andrew's going to come to the mic. Thank you.
My name is Andrew Sullivan, and I am not the chair of the IAB, but I'm still on the IAB for a good 4 days left. And I am quite sure that there is no appetite to reopen an agreement where another party might have a very different opinion about what we want to do, what we ought to be able to do there than we might think. When you have an agreement and you want to reopen that agreement and you want to start negotiating, anything goes on the table. So if you want to reopen an agreement with somebody, the possibility is that you're going to end up negotiating for something and you're going to have to give something up. And I'm not sure what it is you want to give up in order to get this benefit, if you want to get it. But you know, you're going to have to reopen things wide in order to do that. So if that's the discussion that people want to have, first of all, I'm quite sure that this is not the working group in which it ought to be done. And secondly, I'm not really sure that we want the result that we're asking for there, because it could be quite dangerous.
I mean, it seems, Ted Lemon again, it seems from my perspective that if that's the approach that we take, then what we're really saying is that the MOU has effectively been negotiated away from what it actually says, and because we're not willing to have a discussion,
I'm sorry,
which may be a valid thing to do.
I'm going to jump in as AD here. This is off topic, off scope.
Stuart Cheshire. Listening to this discussion, there's something that puzzles me, and I'm wondering if there's some mistaken thinking going on. I'm hearing that in order to make this work, we need the insecure delegation. But the idea behind the special use names registry was that there are certain parts of the namespace that have different properties. And the idea was to actually codify that and have a place you could look to find out what those properties are. Now, in this case, what we're saying is .homenet has these special properties. And then while we're saying that, we're also saying, but we want validating stub resolvers to continue to work without any code changes. And in order to get that goal, we want this thing in the root zone to make that happen. But the whole point of having something in the special use name registry to say, hang on a second, different rules apply to this. So if the people running the root zone wanted to put in an insecure delegation as a pragmatic thing to make legacy code work without any changes, that might be a decision for them to make. But it in no way affects our ability to say this name has the following special properties. And if you are writing a validating stub resolver and you comply with this RFC, you ought to be aware of those special properties and treat this name differently, because if you don't, your customers are going to be unhappy and they're going to disable your software because it's breaking the home network. I don't see any problem with that.
So, Stuart, it sounds like you're arguing that effectively the 6761 application is already kind of a stretch of our chartering not to require host changes.
I guess when you put it that way, yes, it is. Because if you don't require any host changes, the name is not special. If it's not special, it needs to go into does not need to go in the registry. That's kind of a circular argument. But if you want a name with special properties, that implies it is special in some way. If it's not special, it shouldn't be in the special use list.
Okay, hopefully this is a clarified question, Mark.
Mark Andrews. HomeNet is special. The name is ambiguous. That is what makes it special.
Complete agreement. So it is special.
So that is why, that is the only thing that makes it special.
Yep.
There's other things that fall out of that.
Okay.
There's nothing in the special uses registry that says that an unmodified machine shouldn't be able to work, that you have to actually modify a resolver to do things with it.
Okay,
I'm going to
ask you guys to take that offline.
You're making that
Sorry,
assumption
Mark,
there, Stuart.
Mark, I'm going to ask you guys to take this offline. This is not a clarifying question. I don't see one coming anytime soon.
Okay. Ralph, and then we should wrap up and decide what our next step is. Okay. Okay. So Terry, what would you like?
Mine was just a clarification on that discussion.
So the next step is, I think, watch this space. There are still more discussions to have this week. I will email the working group when we see some clarity.
Okay, in which case we will take that to the list as and when that comes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hang on. It would have been nice to have that, what you read on the iPad there, to the list beforehand so that we could have put it on a slide. It was very hard to cache that in my head, and I'm sure it was for everybody else.
I'll send it to the list.
So, yeah, earlier the better.
This is a fluid situation.
Still. And the one thing that I saw fall out of this is, and I think what Stuart's comments sort of backed it up, is that Ray suggested, hang on, maybe we can separate this, remove the insecure delegation piece, and still get a special use. That's something that we teetered on last time, and the decision was, well, we'll give it a try, and we'll see if that's going to be the big deal that it is. We should give the opportunity, I think, for the working group to allow
absolutely
a lesser thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Opportunity for the working group to rethink anything along the way here.
I don't want to open up everything to Andrew's point earlier, right? But that was literally added at the last minute last time. Oh, wait, you're going to need an insecure delegation. Is that a problem? Maybe. We're not sure yet. Okay, we'll see. All right? So if we can, I mean, that was added at the last minute last time.
In fact, it was something that came up in discussion immediately after the meeting closed last time. It was last minute.
If that is the hang-up, let's get it back out. And I think that, I mean, we're still within the context of the working group consensus, which was the TLD name rather than a .ARPA associated one. If that means we end up with a host requirement, we can weigh that. But you know, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater right here. Okay.
Okay. So thank you all. On that note, we can close the meeting and give you an hour and a quarter of your lives back. Thank you. And yeah, we're done. We weren't.
Please use this time to meet up with Julius and Ted about the security thing. at least. Okay.
Okay, and if we could have the blue sheets back, please, and if you haven't signed them, please make sure you do. Okay. Yeah, you were later. Yeah. If please have the blue sheets to the front, and if you've not signed them, come to the front and sign them.
Hi, how's it going? Good to see you.
Hello, Dan. I am.